Good evening, everyone. And I think this is going to be a challenging session simply because after that session where you had a very popular Bollywood actress, we are now talking some very serious stuff about very serious challenges that the world is facing. We'll try and make it pacey. And thank you so much, Excellency, for patiently waiting.
I won't be singing the answers.
Okay. As we start this, these are questions, Ambassador, that I had sent you about a week back, and how fluid the situation is that none of them seem relevant now. They look dated. That's how fluid the situation is in West Asia right now. But let me start by asking, the attack that took place on Prime Minister Netanyahu's residence, how do you think that has altered the course of an ongoing conflict where the world is seeking a solution? Is it becoming even more evasive and far-fetched now?
Well, I'm not sure it became more evasive. I think that the fact that we have begun to do the job in terms of neutralizing the threats, first of all in the south and now in the north, is going to take us sooner than later to the de-escalation of the conflict. We have to remember that this is not a regular conflict. This is a conflict not about territory. It's a conflict about the existence of Israel. Because what Iran and their proxies are trying to do, basically, is to eradicate our country. So this is what we are fighting for, and when you are fighting for a thing like that, it's very difficult to change the ideology of the other side. So what we want to do is create a situation in which we can deter those people that want to eradicate us from continuing their violence. We have very defined goals. The cabinet of Israel has defined very specific goals to eradicate the military capabilities of Hamas in Gaza, to bring back the hostages, and to make sure that Hamas doesn't rearm and regroup. And in the north, what we want to achieve is a situation in which our communities, 60,000 people, up to 70,000, can go safely back to their homes. So it's not something that is far-fetched. We need 1701 resolution of the UN Security Council implemented, and the problem was that in the past, it wasn't implemented. So we have to find a mechanism. Today, the envoy of President Biden, Amos Hochstein, is in Beirut, and we want to achieve a situation in which we can actually reach a ceasefire, but under conditions that will be safe for our population.
On all your three conditions, what many are saying, whether it's the experts or the West, they are saying that it's now becoming a case of shifting goalposts, whether it is about the hostages release, whether it's about the war which started in Gaza and has now expanded to Lebanon, and also about the fact that a ceasefire, it was on the table but wasn't considered by Israel. How do you respond to all those three charges?
Well, first of all, as I said, the defined goals were defined by the cabinet. They didn't change. We aspired to get into a situation in which we can only concentrate in neutralizing the Hamas threat in the south. What happened was that on the 8th of October, in completely unprovoked way, Hezbollah started shooting at Israel. So after 11 months of trying to use diplomacy in order to solve the situation and reach the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, we had basically no choice but to use force in order to convince the other side to start moving in the direction that is desirable. So our goals have stayed completely unchanged. What has happened is that Iran has decided to escalate by expanding this conflict from Gaza to Lebanon, to Yemen, to Syria, to Iraq, and then, of course, by directly attacking Israel with a barrage of ballistic missiles that is unprecedented in the history of warfare.
Reports say that Israel hasn't responded to that attack, that 1st of October attack by Iran, those 200 missiles. And some reports seem to suggest that that retaliation may happen soon, and the window that Israel may like to use is now till November 5th, when American leadership is predominantly occupied by an election. Is that a correct assessment?
Well, the elections in the United States are not a factor here. What is a factor is that we have not only the right, but also a duty to retaliate, Gori, because actually imagine a situation in which a country like Iran is capable of threatening any country in the region with their military capabilities, without any repercussions. This is completely unacceptable. So we have to, if we want to promote stability and prosperity in our region, and we are doing that with a lot of our neighbors. We have peace agreements with Egypt, with Jordan. We have done the Abraham Accords with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Morocco, with Sudan. We have advanced informal dialogue with Saudi Arabia and many other Arab countries. If we want to promote stability, we need to build the building blocks that are necessary. A security building block that is being done with the help of the United States through CENTCOM, and we have proved now, following this attack from Iran, that we are capable of defending the skies of the Middle East from this Iranian threat. But we cannot be in a situation in which the Iranians will feel free to attack us at any point. And that's why that security building block has to be complemented by our retaliation. And if we have a security parameter, a security building block, then we can have political stability, and then on those building blocks we can build the economic stability. So it depends on whether we succeed in our military operation to deter these aggressors from ever attacking us again. And if that succeeds, then not only the countries of the region, but also India and other countries in the world will feel more comfortable to invest in our region. Because imagine that any investment is hindered or is menaced by these unprovoked attacks that are coming from Iran and their proxies. That's completely unacceptable.
Two questions I want to ask on that. One, you mentioned about neighbors. There are now many experts who feel that the present situation and the ongoing conflict has opened doors for Iran to build some connects with some of the other states, and traditional rivalries between the Saudis and Iranians in the past, some of them could be probably ironed out, if not completely, then enough to ensure that there could be an anti-Israel united front. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's not realistic, and I'll tell you why. Because many countries in the region see in Iran a threat. They are not feeling threatened by Israel. On the contrary, many countries in the region see in Israel an opportunity to build this security regime and to acquire the capabilities that they need in order to create a prosperous and stable society. So there is a conflict between Sunnis and Shiites in West Asia. There is a situation that following the Arab Spring, so-called in 2010, the Arab state system collapsed partially, and into that vacuum, all the radical movements, including Iran, have penetrated. And that's how they've been able to control today 4 Arab capitals: Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and Sana'a. And in this way, they are undermining the existence of Sunni Arab countries. So if we do not show resolve, if the Western powers do not show resolve in countering this aggression, of course, many countries will have no choice but to court the Iranians, because they will be afraid from an Iranian attack. So they will, try to impede that, not because they feel friendship to Iran, but because they are afraid of it. Okay? So do we want such an environment to develop in our region? I think that the answer is no. So the answer is that we need to actually deal with the aggressors if we want to achieve peace and prosperity in our region.
The fact that after the elimination of the Hamas leadership, successive leaders have been eliminated by Israeli forces in the last couple of weeks, they've been able to recoup, they've been able to continue attacks, some small, some big, but the fact that they have an ability to recoup, many say that defeats the present form in which Israel is responding to these terror outfits. How do you comment on that?
Well, I think that people are forgetting what is happening on the ground. What we have managed to achieve in the Gaza Strip right now is that we have defeated the army, the terrorist army of Hamas, in a way that they cannot pose a threat, a missile threat to Israel. So we have neutralized that threat. We have destroyed their missile factories. We have sealed the border between the Gaza Strip and the Sinai, so it will be much more difficult for them to rearm, okay? And yes, we have a partial result when it comes to 2 issues. First of all, we have only brought back 150 out of the 250 hostages. We still have 101 hostages left. And we have not yet found a way, an efficient way, to remove Hamas from government. So there are now attempts by the IDF, in coordination, of course, with the government, to create new situations in which we will be able to, for example, distribute humanitarian assistance, so Hamas cannot actually hold the population hostage like they've been doing so far. So there's still some way to go. But in terms of the military balance, this completely changed in the Gaza Strip. In the north, we have somewhat of a similar situation because the IDF has managed to clear between 1 and 3 kilometers from our northern border into Lebanon, and they have discovered there huge amounts of weapons, silos, tunnels, and the infrastructure that an elite force of Hezbollah called the Radwan forces were preparing in order to invade Israel. So this is very clear, and that's, of course, on top of many other things we've done in Lebanon. So right now, the balance, I think, is changing in Israel's favor. We have to find a way to continue our operation in order to achieve the goals and achieve, possibly, political and diplomatic arrangements that will make sure that
I was coming to just that,
okay,
sir,
please.
which is that one, that it's been a year in terms of the collective punishment approach that Israel has been following, right? It's largely
What do you mean
a
by collective punishment?
in the fact that, there's also a large civilian toll for
Well, but
Gaza.
that's not collective punishment. People sometimes are confusing between two things.
Okay.
The fact that, unfortunately, in wars, there is collateral damage, and especially in situations in which you have terrorist organizations that are, breaking any rule in the book, are hiding behind civilians and firing at civilians. They are using ambulances to transfer terrorists. They are using hospitals as military bases. When you have terrorist organizations that operate in such an immoral way, the civilian toll will be bigger.
Is bound to be high. But what I was coming to was that a year after this approach, there have been fantastic military successes, tactical successes that Israel has seen. Whether you take the pagers for the Hezbollah fighters, or whether you take some of the others, they've been, you've been able to eliminate several top leadership of Hamas. But how do these tactical victories translate into long-term political outcomes that can create the stability that the region needs?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that we will need cooperation from international stakeholders, and we will need a situation which the military success is so decisive that the other side actually, out of fear for the survival, will want actually to achieve a diplomatic outcome. That's very difficult to achieve, especially in our region, because you are not dealing here in diplomatic negotiations between two countries. Like, for example, Foreign Minister Jaishankar was talking before about an advancement in negotiations between India and China. This is not a regular situation in which you deal in diplomacy between two countries. You are dealing with radical forces, terrorist groups that are led by an agenda of elimination. So it's not that easy. That's why your question is very good and it's very important. This is a question we have to ask ourselves all the time. And we are seeking cooperation from our American friends and from other countries that are willing to step up to the plate in order to help us stabilize the situation for the long term.
But many Western countries are now asking for an arms embargo as far as Israel is concerned. So in that, where do you fit in the political outcomes that Israel aspires for in terms of a long-term solution, even as it wishes to continue these
look, I think
military
that
strategies?
it's a bit confusing, the situation. I think that many of those countries that have stated statements like that, first of all, are not in the first place selling us any weapons, and if they do, it's pretty minor. And at the end of the day, they have political constraints within their own countries when it comes to different minorities. But it's not really, at this point, undermining whatsoever our military effort. So I don't think that this is going to be substantive in terms of how this war is conducted or ends.
I have two questions to ask, Ambassador, and you've been very candid. And the one question is that everybody's saying that when is that day after going to come? When you talk from a, you talk from a human point of view, when you talk from a, civilian point of view, you talk from the fact that the war expanded. It didn't start with Lebanon, it expanded. So when is that day after going to come? Or has the Israeli political leadership decided to postpone that decision due to several of its own domestic constraints? That's something that many are asking.
I have to revert the question back to you, because the question is what kind of day after you want. If you want a day after that will look like the day before, in which, in a completely unprovoked way, you can be attacked by a genocidal terrorist organization, then the answer is, I don't want that day after. My day after is a day after in which we achieve military and political and diplomatic arrangements that will give us stability for the long term. And unfortunately, because of the decision of Iran to expand this war, this wasn't Israel's decision. As I told you at the beginning, we tried to stay confined to defend ourselves from the terrible attack against our communities on the 7th of October, one of the most savage attacks ever seen since the Holocaust in Israel, okay? So we wanted to stay focused on that. We didn't choose to expand this conflict. There were other parties that chose to do so. So we will have to give a proper answer to that. And if we succeed, then there is a chance that in the long term, these kind of attacks won't repeat themselves, not only against Israel, but also against other countries in the region and in the world at large.
There are 7 fronts. You're right about the fact that these terrorist organizations have tentacles and it's a 7-front war. But this session is about Israel's strategy for the region going forward. Yeah. What is that strategy? Against how these against
as I said it before, it's building blocks. You have to have a security building block. We are building it together with our neighbors and our American friends. We have great intelligence cooperation. We have operational cooperation. We are trying together to defend the skies of the region, to secure trade in the region. So that security building block is it has expanded substantially following the Abraham Accords. It's going to continue to expand. That's number one. Number two is political stability. If we have a good outcome of this military confrontation, we'll be able to expand the Abraham Accords to include other countries in the region that want to join the wagon of prosperity and stability. And if we achieve in doing that...
Saudi Arabia, is that accord still on track?
Yes, and if we achieve in doing that, then we are going to have the possibility to implement larger projects, global projects like IMEC, that are going to connect India with Europe and vice versa. So nobody is going to enter into this adventure of investment if we don't build the building blocks that are necessary. And that is our strategy.
Okay. Then this conclave, this summit, it talks about the India century. And I must ask you this, Excellency, that in a conflict where many developed countries seem to have said that at this stage, political outcomes look not very much feasible on the table for them. Some have even said that maybe countries like India or India can be at the forefront of possibly bringing stakeholders on the table. How do you see India's role in West Asia, and especially for this conflict?
Well, I think a substantial role for India, because India is a rising power. I was looking yesterday at the data. I saw that in the next year, when India grows by 7%, it's going to grow by $260 billion. And then the year after, it's going to grow by $300 billion. And then the year after, it's going to grow by $350 billion. Our economy is $600 billion. Okay? So what India
adding half an Israel every year.
Yeah. So what India has to contribute to the world is huge. India is going to become a powerhouse, a manufacturing hub, and it needs to be connected to the world. It has a lot to offer to countries in West Asia. I've seen how India has been working very well to increase the links with the UAE in the last year. And when all this infrastructure of connectivity is set, then we're going to see an incredible role of India in our region, because it's not going to be just about merchandise. It's going to be about manufacturing together. It's going to be about establishing, as we speak, there are communication cables, optic fiber, that are being built between Europe and India. So there are many aspects of this that are going to bring a lot of prosperity to our region, and we depend on the goodwill of India, on the investments of India, on the cooperation with India, and therefore that role is going to increase every year.
All right. Right, Excellency. Thank you so much for speaking at a time when there's enough and more that's happening in the region, and we are hopeful that this conversation could possibly bring a new dimension to a conflict that the world is wanting to end, but unfortunately doesn't look like ending anytime soon. Thank you, Excellency, for taking
Thank you, Gaurav.